continue our demonstrations 3 days a week and not once as earlier planned. A statement released earlier today by the Azimio coalition says the protests will run from Wednesday to Friday next week as they pile up pressure against the Kenya Kwanza administration. And as KTN's political affairs reporter David Mudhoka now reports, the anti-government push comes amid back-to-back visits of heads of state and investors in the country this week and in the coming week.
On Wednesday this week, normal business activities in several parts of the country came to a halt as the opposition resumed demonstrations against President William Ruto's government. A day later, the opposition announced more demonstrations on Wednesday next week. Hardly 24 hours later, they have made an about turn, announcing the demos will be held for 3 days, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. A statement released by the Azimio coalition today says, and I quote, "Going forward, the peaceful protest will now be held on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday next week, in line with requests from the public to include 3 days of activity. Let's meet on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday." End of quote.
Wednesday kuna maandamano na itaenda Wednesday, Thursday na Friday. Kwa hivyo wasituue, msiharibu mali kama vile governor amesema, lakini maandamano inaendelea.
Serikali gani inatuma polisi wake kupiga watu risasi kwa kichwa na kifua? Hiyo ni nia ya kuua, na tushagundua ya kwamba Ruto ako na squad. Si alisema ameondoa ile squad ya samani, ameweka yake squad ya mauaji.
But to insist on peaceful demonstration in accordance with the law of the land, and the supreme law of the land is our constitution, which guarantees the freedom of peaceful demonstrations.
And while the Raila Odinga-led opposition intensifies its protests that saw at least 14 people dead, hundreds others injured, including police officers, and property destroyed, the President William Ruto administration risks seeing what was to be its 2 weeks of crowning dampened by the protests. Several heads of state and investors were expected in the country starting this week until earlier next week, but the protests have the potential of raining on President Ruto's parade. On Wednesday, Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi landed in the country for a state visit and to address the Kenya-Iran Business Council. While Raisi was at State House, demonstrations were witnessed across the country with the Nairobi Expressway that Iran's Raisi's convoy may have used to travel to and from the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, bearing the brunt of the demonstrations. On Thursday, Ruto's Trade Cabinet Secretary Moses Kuria hosted all 54 African trade ministers in Nairobi for the African Continental Free Trade Area Implementation Matrix just a day after the demos. Same day, President Ruto met investors from Indonesia, led by Indonesia's coordinating minister for maritime affairs and investments, Luhut Binsar, in a meeting to strengthen Kenya and Indonesia's relations. Sunday, just 2 days before the start of the opposition's 3-day-long protests, President Ruto will host over 25 heads of state in Nairobi for the Africa Union Media Summit. A day later, U.S. President Joe Biden's trade chief, Ambassador Catherine Tai, will also be in Nairobi to review the progress of the Kenya-US Strategic Trade and Investment Partnership. This just a day before the opposition takes to the streets again in what will no longer be in full view of the country, but also in full glare of the international community. President Ruto has, however, repeatedly downplayed any impact the protests could have on the visits, vowing to continue with the implementation of his development agenda involving foreign relations.